Help if the microphone was on. This week's case is about a wheelchair-bound teenager that was left in her room to rot during the COVID lockdown. So, let's get started. Hello everyone, my name is Brandy and it is time for a true crime case, mystery, or paranormal story with one or more of my fabulous felines. If you are a returning subscriber, welcome back, my feline friends, and a big shout out to my feline fans for helping support this channel. So yes, I'm late. Look, I'm not going to apologize. We're not going to go through this. You guys know that I'm busy and everything, and I was actually traveling for work, but I do want to make one flex, okay? For those of you that don't know, my full-time job is a program manager for a statewide system here in Iowa, and we made some huge strides in the system recently, and I was traveling for work to train on those things. These things that we did with the system, guys, they're huge and they open up so many opportunities. So I just wanted to kind of, flex that things are going good with my full-time job. Anyway, I'm just really excited about the future. So yeah, anyway, let's get started on this week's case. So do you guys remember the Lacey Fletcher case where the parents just kind of left her to rot on the couch? We have another case like that, okay? But this has to do with actually a teenager. Lacey was an adult, but this is actually a teenager, and she was wheelchair bound. So it's going to be a little bit harder to hear. Her parents just kind of neglected her during the COVID lockdown. The conditions that this poor girl was left in is a little disturbing, and how she was treated. So this is your content warning. If this is not something that you can handle, I would suggest skipping this video. Not only the content warning, but you're going to get mad. When I was researching this case, I was mad, and I actually had to put off this case for a bit because I was so mad, like, I don't think I could put it on camera without, and I still get mad, but, it's kind of settled a little bit, though I'm still mad and it shouldn't have happened, and this should have been 100% preventable, but I just wanted to throw that out there for you, okay? Kaylea Louise Titford was born on September 27th, 2004 in Wales, and that is in the United Kingdom, so this happened across the water. Kaylea was actually born with spina bifida. Spina bifida is a birth defect where the spine and the membranes around the spine has not closed all the way. So Kaylea was wheelchair bound from the time she was born due to this condition. And she had no feelings in her legs. Kaylea also had hydrocephalus, and that is where there's a buildup of fluid in the brain. But as she grew older, she got treatment and this was rectified. So she had no mental impairment due to that. So that was a good thing. So despite these issues that Kaylea had, Kaylea was very independent, and she didn't like it when people would push her wheelchair for her. She wanted to do it herself. She was bound and determined that, she wasn't going to rely on anybody, that regardless of, the curves that life threw at her, she was going to be an independent, happy person. So as a preteen, Kaylea got into wheelchair basketball, and she was very talented at this and enjoyed it very much. Her coach actually told her that she should get into the Paralympics, which is Olympics for, those with physical disabilities. Now, that never really happened, mainly due to the COVID lockdown. Now, Kaylea was a very passionate person as well. She was a sweet girl, and she had a little bit of a mischievous streak in her. Her coach stated that during downtime, they would play cards. And while they were playing cards, Kaylea would sometimes cheat to win. When he'd catch her cheating and kind of call her out on it, she'd just have this sly smile and joyful laugh, and they just had a good time. Everybody had a good time around her. Now, as for Kaylea's home life, Kaylea's parents were Alan Titford and Sarah Lloyd Jones. The two never got married, but they were common law married at that point. Kaylea also had 5 siblings besides herself. So she had, there were 6 kids total. So there were 8 people living in this house. Now, the downstairs of their family home had been adapted for Kaylee's needs with the wheelchair. She had a special, medical toilet to use. There was a lift in her room to get her, around because she couldn't use her legs, from the bed to the chair to the toilet, whatever. And to get in, to help with the shower, baths, stuff like that. Alan and Sarah didn't have the best relationship with each other. There was some domestic issues between them. Police had been to the property several times, but not it's a daily occurrence. So there was some dysfunction there, but it's not like you hear about where it was completely 100% horrible, where everybody was beating each other up. That wasn't the case. Doctors would become concerned about Kaylee's weight about the age of 3. She was in the 99th percentile for weight at that age. This was a concern for any child, but especially in Kaylee's case because, she had no use of her legs, so we need to keep that weight down. Some doctors had worked with Sarah, Kaylee's mother, and introduced, more healthy foods into her diet, kind of educated the family on how to, eat more healthy, get that exercise in, do things as a family, stuff like that. And by the time that Kaylea was 7, her weight was normal and she had stabilized and was just, retaining and not gaining or losing weight. So that was a good thing. Sarah was the main caregiver for Kaylea and the family as Alan worked very long hours at his job. And people would start saying that after Kaylea turned 7, that Sarah became kind of disinterested and kind of, just not trying anymore. And in keeping with these more healthy choices and healthy ways of eating, especially in Kaylee's case. So within 2 years, by the time Kaylea was 9 years old, Kaylee's weight is the talking point of the doctors and even the teachers at her school because she kind of jumped really quick up in weight. By the age of 13, Kaylea is now weighing 16 stones, which is their weight measure in the United Kingdom. In the U.S., that attributes to 224 pounds. So you have a 13-year-old that weighs 224 pounds. Okay, this is double the weight that a child should be at age 13. So just so you know, the standards in that area. The problem is that, Kaylea is going to eat what her parents give her, right? Especially at age 13. And Kaylee's drive, or at least her wish, her goal in life, was to live as an independent adult eventually. But it seemed that her parents were not helping her or not caring about this goal and just kind of fed her whatever. And even at age 13, if there's no healthy food in the house, you can't even I don't want that McDonald's bag. Can I have a, apple or banana instead? There was just no choices there. So she had to eat what was given to her. Now, what makes this frustrating as well is that there were actually, there is a bunch and a number of services that are available to Kaylea and her family because of her disability. In the beginning, Kaylee's family and Kaylea were getting these services, and it was making things easier for the family, of course. But, for whatever reason or another, the family decided not to participate in these services anymore, meaning they stopped taking Kaylea to appointments. They weren't turning in the proper paperwork to continue with stuff. Whatever it was, the requirements to stay on these services, the family or Sarah was not doing it anymore. They just weren't doing the minimum necessary to keep these appointments and services in place for Kaylea. So eventually these services got canceled and nobody was coming into the home or at school to help Kaylea anymore. And this left the family on their own, which of course put more pressure on Sarah. Okay, so I know parents can get overwhelmed, especially if you have 6 children. and you both work out of the home, and there's just, chaos in the household, I'm sure. And then you have, one of your children that has a disability and wheelchair and all of that. And so, I get it. It's hard to keep up on stuff. But by not doing the minimum necessary to keep these services in place, this put more pressure on Sarah and I'm sure the other family members. And I mean, it just makes things worse. But, basically is if you need the help, keep the help, do what you need to do that's necessary. It wasn't like they weren't eligible. They just weren't doing what they needed to do to stay on this services. There were a lot of medical appointments that got missed that Kaylea didn't make it to. So she was then discharged from physiotherapy, which this is a physical rehabilitation type therapy and treatment for individuals like Kaylea who don't have the use of their legs. So it teaches them how to exercise and get, burn off calories and stay active when you can't, go jogging or run or stuff like that. And she was no longer seeing a dietitian because that was part of the services too. So her weight continued to skyrocket. So cut to March of 2020 when the lovely COVID-19 came into the world and the entire world went into a pretty much lockdown. This is where it got the worst for Kaylea. This is the start of the systemic neglect that Kaylea started going through. They weren't hitting her. They weren't, like physically abusing her, but basically they were ignoring what she needed as a disabled person with spina bifida and wheelchair bound, whether that was exercise or movement of her legs, medical care, arms, healthy food choices. Those were all being pretty much denied by her at this point. I'm not saying her parents didn't love her or anything like that, but they weren't even doing the bare minimum of care for Kaylea. So not only weren't doing the bare minimum to keep services in place, they started not even doing the bare minimum to keep Kaylea healthy as a person, as a human being, okay? And by the sounds of it from their trial, they just wanted to do this path of least resistance and didn't want to go out of their way for anyone, not just Kaylea, but any one of their children. So Sarah would admit at trial that she was overwhelmed with her work. She was a employee that still continued to work because she was a caregiver for other people. A little scary, but we'll get into that. She worked out of the house, and Alan did too. They were considered essential workers. And Alan would admit that he would never help Sarah out. Alan would admit that he would just come home, grab a beer, and go watch TV. And like he didn't have kids or something. I don't know. That pisses me off too. But again, it's like, if you need help, get off your ass and do something. That's your daughter too. That's your kids too. But anyway, I'm getting off at a tangent. Sorry. I'm getting mad. Anyway. Okay, so that wasn't bad enough doing all this. COVID lockdown hit, right? If you're watching this video way in the future, some people might be going, what the hell was COVID? Okay, so just quickly, I won't spend a lot of time on it, but COVID lockdown was when the government told everyone to stay in their homes, and they closed the schools and restaurants and other public places to avoid the spread of COVID-19, the coronavirus. It was kind of a pandemic going on at the time, and it was supposed to be just kind of a shutdown for 2 to 4 weeks, but in most areas it ended up being for over a year. We have heard some pretty bad stories coming out of COVID lockdowns, some good stories too, but when it came to children mostly who potentially was already in a bad situation at home before COVID, whether that was that they lived in filth, dysfunction, lived in violent or abusive environments, the lockdown actually made things worse, because now these children in these situations, they had no way to kind of escape the situation, even temporarily, by going to school or playing with their friends. They were pretty much trapped indoors with, these abusive people or in these really bad environments. And it just didn't go well, unfortunately. So, like I said, the COVID lockdown started in March of 2020 in most places. Kaylee's like coaches and teachers, they always kept an eye on Kaylea because they were worried about her and her weight at that time. But now, everybody was on lockdown. There was no schools open, no nothing, so they couldn't, keep an eye on her any longer. So Kaylee's care pretty much fell solely on Sarah, her mother. Now, Alan, Kaylee's father, like I said, would work long hours, so he claimed he couldn't help out Sarah, and when he got home, all he wanted to do was grab a beer, relax, and watch television. So he couldn't be helped, to do anything for his children, let alone Kaylea. It was reported that Alan actually didn't have to work those long hours. This is what came out in trial, is that his employer said that he didn't have to work those long hours. He volunteered to work those long hours, and he actually did enjoy his job, which, sometimes is rare, and mostly he just enjoyed being out of the house because there were 6 kids and it could be chaotic. So, you can kind of see there what's going on. With Sarah, like I said before, her actual job was being a caregiver for other people. So she would go give care to other people and strangers, then come home to care for Kaylea, but we know now she wasn't giving that care to Kaylea, and she stated it was because she was just too exhausted by the time she got home, and then she had to take care of the kids, get them dinner, all that, while Alan just chilled, and by the time that was all done, she was exhausted, which I'm not blaming her for that either, but here's my little rant, okay? I can relate to the exhaustion thing, okay? There are days at my full-time job where I am mentally and physically just exhausted by the time I walk into the door at night. I just want to crawl in bed and, not move till the morning, right? And if it's the weekend, I just want to stay in bed all weekend sometimes. I don't have kids. We know that. I don't want kids. But as you know, I have many cats. I have 3 dogs and I have 3 turtles. I have to care for them, because they can't care for themselves, right? Hi, honey. Plus, I chose to have these animals. I chose to take them in and care for them. That means that I am responsible for them. My husband is too, but I'm just talking in general terms, right? Okay. Here's where I'm going with this. I get that you can accidentally get pregnant. Happens all the time. But you have 6 children. 6 children are not accidents at this point. You are either not being responsible or you wanted these kids at this point, okay? So, again, my opinion, my rant. We'll get back to the story. All right. Kaylea is hanging out in her room in the downstairs of the house because you remember that has all been adapted for her. So the family kind of stayed upstairs. That was their living space, living area. Her parents, or Sarah, I should say at this point, is just bringing home fast food after work. Or they're making those like quick meals that may not be so healthy, macaroni and cheese, chicken. Hey, I'm not saying they're not tasty. I will live on macaroni and cheese if I have to, but we all know it's not healthy to have for every meal. The rest of the family can obviously move freely around the house, get some exercise, even maybe go in the backyard. But, Kaylea is pretty much laying in her bed in her room at this point, because the wheelchair only allows her really to go on the bottom level. She's probably bored, right? I mean, we all were locked down. You can only watch so much Netflix until you've ran through everything you wanted to watch, right? And what do most of us do when we get bored? We eat, we snack, we do that. So I can only imagine, besides the unhealthy meals that she was getting from her mother, I'm sure there was snacks just put in her room and stuff too. Now, it was also said in the last 3 months of Kaylee's life, her parents spent over $1,200 in takeout food, so fast food, takeout food. So they were eating out approximately 4 to 5 times per week at this point. So none of her kids were getting healthy food at this point, and neither were her or Alan. Kaylee's weight continued to increase because of this. She got to the point that she couldn't even fit in her wheelchair anymore, okay? And when that started to happen, Her parents did nothing to get her a different wheelchair, to maybe try to attempt to give her healthier food. They just didn't do anything to fix the situation. So Kaylea is now 100% bedridden at this point and can't even get out of bed to get in her wheelchair. Okay. So she can't move about on her own, besides, moving herself around on her bed. And she can't even get out of bed to go to the bathroom. Now, we said that she had the lift in there, but once investigators got in there, they showed that there was dust and everything all over the lift. Fly, feces, we'll get into that. It'll get bad. But nobody was even using the lift. Okay, so this is where it's going to start to get bad. I'm not going to go into the details that I read, but I'm going to try to generalize just so you get an idea, and it's bad enough, okay? Because Kaylea could not get out of bed, her bed pretty much became her bathroom. At some point, Sarah, her mom, had put in a catheter for her. Remember, Sarah's a nurse. So that she would then empty her bladder so Kaylea wouldn't pee the bed. Now, Sarah would empty her bladder into like empty water bottles instead of doing it properly. But then it got worse because not only would she empty her bladder into empty water bottles, instead of just taking the water bottles and pouring them into the toilet, she would just set them around the room, open. Some of them weren't even have caps on them, and some would get spilled and everything. So now there are urine-filled water bottles all over Kaylea's room, next to the bed or on the floor. Some of them spilled, so you can imagine the smell starting in there. But there was another issue besides just urine. Kaylea sometimes had to poop too, right? And Kaylea would go to the bathroom in her bed, go to the bathroom, number 2, in her bed, and her parents wouldn't come in and clean her up or help her to the shower or the bath or anything like that. They would just let her sit in it. So after a while of this, we're not even talking months at this point. We're just talking a couple days or a week, We know how this goes, right? Everybody knows how this goes. Kaylea starts getting bed sores because she's not getting out of bed and not moving around. The bed sores are starting to get infected because of the urine and feces and just general unhygienic conditions. Flies and bugs start being attracted to that bed. And to make it worse, when, the fast food would be brought home or the takeout would be brought home, Kaylea would throw it away by the garbage by her bed. But then when that garbage filled over, Sarah wouldn't change the garbage or whatever. So pretty soon it was just old food bags, old food, uneaten food around the room. So that continued to attract more flies and bugs. We know due to all of those things, there was an odor, there was a smell in that room, in that house. It was permeating in the house at this point. And I'm sure it was pretty unbearable. And Kaylea had no choice but to sit in it. Kaylea was explained as this independent girl, and now she's stuck in a bed, completely dependent on help from her mom mainly, and she's not helping her. Now, Kaylea did have her cell phone. And the family would hang out upstairs and Kaylea would be up by herself downstairs. So when Kaylea needed something, she would text her mother, ask her for things. Kaylea was a smart girl as well. After months of being in this state where she was stuck in her bed, living and laying in unhygienic conditions, she knows something's wrong. So she texted her mother and saying that she needed help because one of the wounds on her legs was leaking, that it was oozing. Her mother's response to this, the nurse's response to this, oh, for fuck's sake. If that wasn't bad enough, sorry guys, it gets worse. The room is filling with flies and bugs at this point. It's bad. You can't walk into the room without, they're everywhere. And all her parents did was they went down and they hung up those fly strips that, like the glue fly strips. They were all over the room. That's what her parents did for her. Instead of cleaning her up and getting her fresh sheets or getting her a new bed or getting her a wheelchair so she could move around, no, we'll just hang up fly strips because that'll do the trick. At one point, Kaylee texted her mom and asked if they could do something about the baby flies. Yes, she was talking about maggots. Kaylee was saying that the flies were landing on her, and getting into her bed sores, and they were laying eggs, and these eggs were hatching. And so she had maggots all over her wounds on her legs because she couldn't feel her legs, right? There's probably very little blood flow going down to it, which would make things worse, of course. But now you got bugs and flies and maggots in your wounds constantly. Her mother's response to this, again, her mother, the nurse, response to this, they like you, LOL. At this point, Kaylee is 16 years old, and she weighs 22 stone, which in the U.S. is 308 pounds. It's now September of 2020, so Kaylee has been in this situation since March of 2020. Kaylee celebrates her 16th birthday on the 27th of September, and her family gives her cards and balloons, and, they put them up in the window in her room, and so they kind of have a little birthday party in this room where Kaylee is at. No visitors, though. So by this time, COVID lockdown's kind of slowing, right? They're like, okay, we're going to start opening back up. And schools had sent out notices, hey, we're going to open back up at the end of September. Everybody needs to come back, all that stuff, right? We're thinking, okay, Kaylee can get out of this situation finally. No. Kaylee doesn't go back to school. Her parents keep her home for obvious reasons. The staff at the school, who had been worried about Kaylee this entire time, start making welfare calls to the house. Like, hey, why isn't Kaylee back in school? What's going on? Why, let's get her back into the basketball. Sarah makes several excuses on why, Kaylee's not going to be there every time that they would call. Now, the school's getting concerned at this point, and they decide that, they need to probably take some action or call authorities or something. Unfortunately, by the time they did this, it would be too late. Following weeks after her 16th birthday, there were several text messages that Kaylee had sent to her parents asking for help, mainly asking if they could clean up the room, if they could let her shower, if they could, do something so the flies would go away, so the bugs would go away. And she wanted help, somehow let's use the lift so I can actually get to the toilet. And so this won't keep continuing. Kaylee was doing her best to try to solve this issue for herself. And she couldn't because her parents were unwilling to do any of it. Sarah's solution to this was to just give Kaylee a bunch of those dog training, like those puppy pad training pads to lay on. And then she would wrap them around Kaylee's legs so to keep the urine and feces away from the wounds. That was her solution. The night of October 9th, 2020, just 2 weeks after Kaylee turned 16, Kaylee was in agony. She was crying and she was screaming from her room because she was in pain. She was telling her mom through text message she was in pain. That she couldn't get comfortable. Everything hurt. She was scared. Her body is literally decomposing from being eaten alive by maggots and everything, and she's trying to get help from her parents. Sarah stops responding to her through text message. So she starts texting her father. Do you want to know what her father's response was at this point of Kaylee screaming in agony and asking for help, begging her parents for help? Nobody goes down to check on her. He sends her 2 text messages, and they both say the same thing. Shut up and stop screaming. The next morning, Sarah goes into Kaylee's room to find Kaylee unresponsive. Kaylee was sitting up in her bed, but instead of calling authorities like a normal person would, Alan calls his mom first. Alan's mother, actually a smart woman, is the one that calls the authorities. and passes on the information that Kaylee was found unresponsive and they can't wake her up. They knew she was dead. She was cold to the touch, and she wasn't breathing. How long do you think somebody could survive in a situation like that? Now, the authorities call Alan while they're sending somebody over to try to get some context of what's going on. And they call the house and they get Alan, the father, on the phone, and they are trying to talk him through CPR. But Alan, you can hear him on the 911 call. I will link the 911 call. He just keeps saying, there's no use, she's dead. The dispatcher explains that CPR can restart somebody's heart. And, he needs to get her flat on the floor and he needs to try. And Alan is unwilling to try. And he simply says to the dispatcher, I can't get her on the floor. She's just too big and too heavy. The paramedics arrive shortly thereafter. And when they went into the room, they are met with the stench right away. They see the state of the room, full of discarded fast food trash, bowls piled up, discarded water bottles with urine in them, some spilled, soiled dog training pads, because when Sarah would change the dog training pads off of Kaylee, she wouldn't bother to throw them away. She just threw them on the floor. There was fly paper strips hanging from ceilings, tons of flies attached to it. Just filth. It took a lot of paramedics, but when they moved her body, underneath her, they saw bugs everywhere. Maggots both on her bed and in her wounds. It was terrible. Kaylee had an autopsy. And during the autopsy, these professionals involved said it was the worst case of bed sores they had ever seen. These bed sores were huge, gaping wounds, and they were very deep in her flesh and fat tissue. She had an ulcer on her right heel. And remember, she couldn't move her legs without lifting them herself. So it had been this long since she's moved one of her legs that it created an ulcer on her heel. And the ulcer was so bad that it was exposing the bone in her heel of her foot. Her armpits, they were blackened, and her hair was encrusted with dead skin cells because she had not bathed since March of 2020, at least 6 months, and lived in filth on top of that. Her official cause of death was recorded as inflammation and infection in extensive areas of ulceration arising from obesity and its complications, and immobility in a girl with spina bifida. Her parents were immediately taken into custody and questioned over this whole thing. In the beginning, Alan put all the blame on Sarah, saying that she was the responsible one for Kaylee's care, and because he worked long hours, and once Kaylee hit puberty, he was uncomfortable with, anything where he may see her privates. So, helping her go to the bathroom or helping her bathe was completely out of the question for him to do and highly inappropriate in his mind. Alan, your comfort level is the most important at this point. Dick. This was, of course, bullshit. We all know this, right? He claimed he did go into her room on her birthday, her 16th birthday, 2 weeks before she died, but nothing triggered that she wasn't okay because he acted like he had no idea how bad she was. What? She's living in filth, laying in waste. There are bugs and flies everywhere. There's a smell. But no, he didn't see anything wrong. He just wished her a happy birthday and went back to pretending it wasn't an issue. Alan, you're fucking dumb, but you're not that fucking dumb. Sarah, well, she did the same thing. She blamed everything on Alan, but it was more in the context of that she was overwhelmed, that he had never helped her. So she fell into like a depression, and didn't care for Kaylee like she should have. Now, yes, Alan didn't help. That's not a lie. We know that. He's admitted that. But Sarah had the option for help from many sources, but decided not to follow through with them. And even during a COVID lockdown, those are considered essential services. So they still would have served Kaylea and helped the family even during the COVID lockdown. So I'm sorry, but I do not feel sorry for you. Sorry, not sorry. I'm not really sorry, but I don't feel sorry for you. So Alan and Sarah were charged with gross negligence at this point. In December of 2022, Sarah would end up pleading guilty to gross negligence and manslaughter, which pleading guilty does reduce your sentence in Wales. So Sarah was sentenced to 6 years, but she could be out in 4 years with good behavior. Alan would continue to plead not guilty at his trial. He stated he wasn't responsible for Kaylea's death because he was not the caregiver. You're her father, you idiot. A parent is a caregiver. And he didn't realize how bad his daughter's condition was. He stood by that. She was screaming her last night alive, and his last words to her was, "Shut up." Some people just should not be parents ever. In January of 2023, the trial starts for him, and it's stated, Kaylea lived in a condition unfit for an animal, let alone a human. And they had pictures. You can go out I'll show some pictures, but you can go out on the internet and see some pictures. And during the trial, the prosecution proved, that he was responsible for lack of Kaylea's care and neglect. And when he was straight up asked by the prosecutors, "Why didn't you do anything? You could have just called somebody and made it better." His reply, "I'm lazy." The jury found Alan guilty of gross negligence and manslaughter, the same as Sarah, and he was sentenced to 7 years. But with good behavior, he can be out in 5 years. Look, we all don't agree with these sentences. And we know sometimes the sentences can be not what they should be. We've seen ridiculous sentences like this before, but it is what it is. At least they got some jail time, I guess. So many people ask, I've seen this when I was reading about this case and researching it, there were a bunch of people that asked the same question. If Kaylea had her phone with her, why didn't she just call someone? Or call emergency services or something. It was stated at Alan's trial that Kaylea trusted her parents. Why wouldn't she? It's like Stockholm Syndrome at this point. She trusted her parents, so she probably never thought of calling anyone or reaching out to somebody outside of her home, because why wouldn't her parents help her eventually? So, and who knows what her parents told her? We don't know that either. So the reason this case bothered me so much, most cases don't bother me. I can distance myself away from them. It breaks my heart that Kaylea was crying and screaming for her parents the night before her death. She probably knew she was dying. It was that bad. She was in pain. Her body was decomposing at that point. How can a parent ignore that? Especially knowing the condition she's in. Why would you ignore that? My dog whines and I'm like, "What's wrong?" My cat sneezes and I'm making sure it's nothing more than just a sneeze. Kaylea was failed by her parents, and this was someone who wanted to be independent. This was the worst way for her to die, not only physically, but mentally. It was completely opposite of what she wanted. But she was still young, and she was at the mercy of her parents. It doesn't go into a lot about her siblings. It does state in the trial that at one point her next oldest sister had come downstairs, and her sister tried to plead with her mom to help her with the flies as well. And her sister, I guess, tried to clean some stuff up. But then after that, it doesn't really say what happened. So I'm sure the parents were keeping the siblings away from her as well, which just makes everything worse, right? Unfortunately, the COVID lockdown has brought out some real horrific cases, and I doubt that we're done hearing about all of them. So, yeah. What are your thoughts on this case? I pretty much can probably tell you what your thoughts. You're mad, you're pissed off, and yeah, that's me right now. But I would still like to hear your thoughts. And on this case, please comment down below. Thank you for tuning in. And for the next video, I will try to go a bit lighter for this story. I think we've had some heavy stories lately, so I will try to find a lighter story like the maple syrup heist or something similar to that. Maybe a Ponzi scheme or something we can come up with. If you have any suggestions, please let me know. And I will see you guys next time. Bye.